Hey, super awesome listeners, it's Matt. Jenn is on summer break getting ready for season 5 of What Are You Listening To? So while she's resting and preparing all at the same time, we've got some of the best of her episodes as well as some of the other shows on the Super Awesome Mix podcast network. This week is Jenn's visit with Rob Kassees from the Chop Unlimited from February of this year. Enjoy it, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review and then share the show with all the music lovers in your life.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to Season 4 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by Rob Kassees. Rob is an expert in the field of music. His areas of expertise include production techniques, songwriting, indie music marketing, and an insane working knowledge of the greater Western musical canon. He also created and hosts the podcast 1001 Album Complaints, where musicians dive deep into the stories behind classic records with jokes. And I have to say, before we jump in, this is one of my new favorite podcasts. So you're going to hear me talking a lot about the show this week, listeners. This week, like always, Rob and I are going to get to know each other through 4 songs. 2 are his picks and 2 are mine. For the best listening experience, I recommend tuning into the show on Spotify. There you can hear the show with the songs we discuss incorporated. You can also find the show on Apple, Amazon Music, or wherever you stream. But if you're not listening on Spotify, be sure to give the playlist a listen and then tune into our conversation. With that, let's get started. Rob, please tell me what you're listening to this week.
Thanks so much, Jen. I'm listening to Life During Wartime live by Talking Heads.
Oh man, I mean, the song, the album, the movie, like everything about this is so genius. I was so glad to have you. I have occasionally people will bring a Talking Heads song, but they often will pick, not that this isn't one of their big hits, but they'll pick, like the usual Burning Down the House or, like a really popular, overplayed. Well, I don't know that you can actually overplay Talking Heads because I love them so much, but
Sure.
I was so glad that this was the song that you brought. And I'm usually not a fan, like, I'm not a live album gal. I just don't dig a live album except this one. This is always my one exception when having the conversation with other music fans about live albums. This is the one. This is my one, like, hall pass for a live album because I think it's so good. Tell me about this song. Tell me why you chose this one. I know as a musician, like, that's always their number one complaint when I have musicians on the show is like, how am I only going to pick 2 songs? So tell me
Sure.
why this one.
Yeah, it's tough. I wanted to pick 2 songs that represented 2 halves of my musical life, but were both really important to me, cornerstones of influence
Okay.
on what I've done musically and what I care about. And so this one, Talking Heads, came to me pretty early in my life, probably when I was early in high school. I was just attracted by their strangeness. David Byrne, as we know, has this anthropologist from Mars approach to songwriting
Yes.
that I just think really works. And you're totally right that many live albums do not elevate the music in the way that I think you want as a fan. I mean, it's one thing to be at a live concert, of
For
course, you want
sure.
to get all this extra energy. But when it gets to the recording level, I think a lot of times they fall a bit short. So I would have to agree. This one, on the other hand, this is the band at its absolute peak. They're playing with so many extra members. It just gets across to me the ecstasy of live performance. And I think that's such an important part of why music is great and why it's important in my life. This energy that gets added at the live stage to make it work. And then the other thing I want to point out about the song is how simply constructed it is. I've always been fascinated by material that does not rely on a lot of complicated changes. This song is basically a vamp over A minor for the entire song. But you wouldn't know that as a casual listener. I think that having that challenge in songwriting leads to a lot of really interesting innovation. You have to then make some of those dynamic changes happen, those peaks and valleys with things like melody and rhythm and subtle energy shifts with the band. So I just think they nail it here.
Totally. And like, and sheer quirk a lot of the time, right? Like, it's so interesting every time you listen. And the thing I love about Talking Heads, I discovered them pretty early on too. And I think that just the way that their songs can hold a different meaning for me at different points in life. I love that. I talk about it a lot on the show. I'm a big lyrics person. It's one of the main things that I love about music, especially not being a musician. Like lyrics are songs are my poetry and my library, everything. So lyrics matter to me. And I just feel like you can never stop analyzing Talking Heads lyrics too. That makes it just adds this other level of dynamicness to their music to me that I think is so rich and makes them just a band that you can listen to endlessly.
Absolutely. Because it's always danceable, it's always rhythmic. And I'll only mention one other thing because it's going to connect to the other song we eventually talk about. To me, songwriting and storytelling within songwriting are really important. And I think what David Byrne, you wouldn't think it would work so well, but what it seems like he does in a song like this is he picks up the story in the middle and he ends it before the end. And that is such a great
Yes.
storytelling technique. I'm just left wanting on both ends, and I have to fill in the gaps in my mind with my imagination. And so, like you said, it's just infinitely interpretable.
It's so good and it's so funny. I'm gonna go ahead and bring this up, listeners. I teased you at the beginning, like I'm gonna talk a lot about Rob's show 1001 album complaints, and one of the episodes that I recently listened to was your episode about Oasis, about the Definitely Maybe album. And so to go from that episode, where great album, like listeners listen and chime, you can hear the complainers. I love that you guys call yourself the complainers,
Sure.
their hot take on whether or not you should listen to Definitely Maybe Before You Die or not. But the point is, I think we can all agree, whether you're an Oasis fan or not, their songwriting is really simple. It's really, I mean, basic is maybe a harsh word, but it's pretty simple. It doesn't leave you wanting more. You're not hungry for where they gathered these lyrics from. So it's such a stark contrast to something like Talking Heads, where it is so deep and the songwriting is so technical. It's so magical. Sometimes you're like, wait, I'm lost. It's so smart. You can't even keep up with it. At least I feel that way sometimes. And so it is like amazing to go from like hearing your take on something like that and then diving into, like a Talking Head song that's just brilliant. And every song on the album is like that. There's not
Yeah.
one song on this album that I'm like, that felt really basic or that was really one note, like they're
Uh,
all amazing and
this whole
layered.
album kicks. This is such a great, like you said, the film that they made of this is excellent.
So
So
good.
the whole show from conception to song choice, even down to the mixing, I think is just really brilliant here. You can, or it certainly feels, I didn't see them on this tour, so I don't know how rehearsed and consistent these particular versions were, but what you hear on the tape, it sounds like improvisation, the band responding to each other rhythmically, tonally, in the moment, right? And you just get this crackle of everything. Since you brought up Oasis, though, and the show, I just want to point out that, listen, uh, music is subjective. We all know
Of
this, right?
course. Of course.
And I think what we strive to do on this show is tell a story about how certain records came to be because we love learning about the story. And I find that the more I learn about how art is created, the more I guarantee the more I appreciate it. Even if I don't end up loving it or it's not subjectively intended for me, that, that's fine. I love learning about those things. We love talking about them. And to be honest, even after I have this conversation with some of my oldest friends on the podcast, it leaves my brain spinning to keep thinking about Oasis. And since that Oasis conversation, I've been thinking more and more about the strategy that I think Oasis employ to repeat themselves a lot in the lyrics, to make you
Yes.
remember and to
Yes.
make it more stadium ready. And that came up on the show.
Yeah, the
But
title first songwriting concept was great to
sure.
me.
Sure. But so what I'm saying is, like, I'm still kind of grokking that and appreciating that that might actually be a really good approach. And I think there is a connection to how David Byrne writes in a way. So yeah.
Okay, okay. You know what? I think the intentionality for sure is there for both bands. I think one just does it in a more civilized way. Can we say that?
Yeah, maybe. Bands and artists mature through their lifetime. I think we all
Sure.
recognize that. And there are times when that initial creative push, that first effort is just so exciting and crackles with so much energy. And there's other times where bands mature. Talking Heads has always been an important band to me, in part because they mature through their career. And also because they ended at a time when I think they were still making really, really good material and have
Yeah,
never gotten back together, and they never should, for the record. So I love bands that continue to evolve as they go and show that they want to change, and it's normal for people to want to change and get into new kinds of music and want to try new avenues.
for sure. For sure. And that's something that I love about following a band throughout their career too, is like seeing how they grow and change and how they sound different, or even how people transition in and out of a band. I often have the conversation too about Van Halen, right? Like I have a lot of disdain for people that like don't acknowledge Van Hagar. Like to me, Van
Sure.
Halen is Eddie Van Halen, right? Like it doesn't really matter to me if it's Sammy Hagar or David Lee Roth. Like it's still Van Halen because of Eddie Van Halen, but that's a whole other episode.
Sure.
But I agree with you in that, like, yes, I too think that bands can grow and evolve and change, and just the raw energy that Oasis started with, I think, is what kind of clicked them into my CD player at the time. Was I was just so excited about this kind of new sound, and it wasn't the downer that was kind of coming from the Manchester sound, and it wasn't the downer from grunge music. It really did sort of kick off that Brit pop movement. But I think all 145 episodes of your show are going to be worth listening to, but that Oasis episode just really, I loved it, and so I'm calling that one out specifically.
Well, thank you for that.
um Absolutely. And as we are talking about artists that have grown and changed and really morphed throughout their career, I think that's a perfect sort of segue into your second pick. Tell me what your second song was.
My second song is David Bowie's Space Oddity.
Mm, so good. I mean, I should have called out like at the top of the show, like we could do an episode, a whole episode about each one of these songs individually. I feel
Course,
like
yeah.
they're such like amazing. All I feel like all four tracks on this playlist are strong. So this one might be my favorite out of the four songs on the list. But tell me why Space Oddity was important to you, and why this one. You mentioned earlier that there were sort of represented kind of two halves of your
Yeah.
songwriting journey, or musical journey. What does this song represent?
Well, this is the other great David in my life, right? Who I've admired for a very long time and discovered when I was a goofy 13-year-old, awkward 13-year-old, and felt like he embodied this weird is actually cool, and you should feel
Yes.
confident about that aesthetic, which helped me a lot in my high school years. But I think what this song is intended to represent, other side of the coin, is the beauty of layered production,
Mm,
how lush things can get, the subtlety of when you add the bells and whistles that aren't just the live band playing in the studio, and how you choose the different timbres and tones that are going to be on the recording. So yeah, this song embodies that, the lush orchestration, there's a tuba in there, there's some interesting synth stuff, there's an acoustic guitar obviously, so there's just like a really great confluence in a way that you would not expect anything like this to be coming from a live band on stage. It just wouldn't sound like this.
No, I completely agree. Those are what almost every single note I took about this song is about the production, because I feel like it is such a great song. And like, yes, we could get into the lyrics, we could get into David Bowie. There's so much, but just the production of this song is so good. And I can remember, like, as a kid, listening on my Walkman or whatever, and being so freaked out by whenever it first comes on, you only hear the song in one ear. It's like a
Sure.
mono track, and I'm
Yeah.
speaking again as a non-musician. And then it like morphs into surround sound. And as a kid, it amazed me. As an adult, it amazes me because in effect, you almost have like David Bowie like harmonizing with himself. You've got two songs happening, one in each ear, and that's just
Absolutely.
mind blowing to me. I don't know how you think of that. I don't know how you say like, I'm going to put guitar in one ear and a clap track on the other, and somehow it's going to work. And it's amazing the way it comes together.
Totally agree. I'm glad you mentioned the stereo separation aspect of this because it is really important and I think very, very intentional. It's actually something we talk a lot about on the podcast, and we complain that sometimes old recordings, especially from the '60s, feel a little haphazard. With oh yeah, I'll just throw the guitar all the way to the left, and I'll just put the vocal over here for some reason, and we've almost talked that to death. But I think in this case, David Bowie is doing things really purposely, like you said.
Yeah.
He's duetting with himself, and it's separated. A lot of times when people harmonize themselves on recordings, they're pushed right to the center and they're mixed in such a way that it's intended to almost disappear into the mix what's happening, right? But here it's really naked. It's out there. It's very clearly two people, and even when they come together, you can very clearly continue to hear both parts. So it also helped me learn how to sing harmony and what that even sounded like, because if you're trying to study recordings of the Beatles or whoever singing harmony and pull apart what that other note is, it can be challenging sometimes. So this is a great learning song as well.
And I also appreciate too sort of the I don't even know a better way to say it, but it feels really it's not coming from an egocentric place, right? I feel like a lot of times when people are harmonizing, it's to like show off how brilliant they are at harmonizing. And to me, it feels like he just had a very deliberate intention for these two, like I said, like almost like separate songs to kind of come together and form this one rich genius track. So I
Absolutely.
love that it comes from this place of like humbleness, it feels like, for being such a brilliant song. I
Totally.
don't even know if that makes sense.
And when I was 13, I must have gotten my hands on a David Bowie greatest hits album because I was in that modality of buying greatest hits and trying to discover classic rock. And this was the first track on there. And
So
so let's
good.
just talk about the story that he's telling. That really spoke
Yeah.
to me at the time. I mean, I am a sci-fi fan. I love movies that are sort of about the quiet loneliness of space. And
Yep.
I believe Bowie's said that this was based on him going to see 2001: A Space Odyssey, kind of
Yep.
going home and writing this song. And in fact, I read that it was because all this is happening before we land on the moon. This song was rushed to release to pretty much coincide with the moon landing, which is
Yep.
really interesting. So it was just a time where people didn't really know anything about space, and we knew even less than we think we know now. But that story is just so creepy. This idea of stepping out of the spaceship and sort of floating away forever.
Yep. Totally. Same thing. Like I can remember just being captivated by the storytelling of this song and this album in general. Like I think it's so good. And same thing as a kid, like I could just put on my Walkman on like a long drive or whatever and just completely have a movie going on in my head with this in the background. Like it really is perfect for that. And I think that we pulled the song version that'll accompany the playlist is from the 2015 remaster of this album, which is also so good. Oftentimes with a remaster, you're like, yeah, I didn't really notice anything different. But again, I think because the production is so important to this track and this album in its totality, like that 2015 remaster is really just so rich and so good.
Absolutely. And you know what? We say this also all the time on 1001 Album Complaints, but this is an amazing song. If you're not listening on good headphones, get yourself a pair of decent headphones, sit
Yep.
down, close your eyes, and you'll start to hear so much. This production will just open up to you. The weird spaceship liftoff and the stereo separation we talked about. One other timestamp I wanted to call out, which I just think is a masterclass of both production and songwriting, is when the line, "Your circuit's dead." Right when that line hits, the tone of the song changes to minor. I think he gets like a glockenspiel or something in there. Like
Yep.
everything shifts on that inflection point of that line. It's brilliant.
It is brilliant. I'm so glad you called that out. I've always, that's like the second thing I noticed after that sort of opening with the mono to stereo is that part where it
Yeah,
like it does go into a minor chord and the mood changes, you know, you're like, oh,
totally.
wait. And again, it contributes to that sort of feeling of isolation or loneliness for me at least. And so I love that. Yeah. It's such a good song.
Now, I feel like I should say, if I'm representing David Bowie fans out there, if anyone's listening, they're probably shouting at their speakers saying, David Bowie went back later and told us this is actually about a heroin addiction, not about a spaceman. But listen,
Right.
I reject that. I just want you to
Right.
know, I don't care. I don't care what the man himself said. This is about a guy stepping out of the spaceship.
Right. It's what it means to you, whatever it means to you. And I think
Exactly.
David Bowie would support that. I think I also have to call out here too, just for fun, that my dog is named Bowie because he has one brown eye and one blue eye.
Oh,
So
rad.
there we go. People often ask, that's how I know when we introduce the dog. And people are like, oh, is it because of David Bowie? Because of his eyes? I'm like, it is. Thank you. We can continue chatting.
Nice.
All right. Well, with that, we will head on into my first pick. And this is a song that I have loved forever and recently has sort of been chasing me. It's a song called Shipbuilding by Elvis Costello and the Attractions. And what I mean whenever I say that, like, the song's been chasing me, I discovered this song probably when I was in high school. One of my lifelong best friends is named Allison. And so when people randomly started walking up to her singing, I was like, what's this about? Like, why are people singing to you? Like, why are they saying their aim is true? Like, I don't get it. And so I had to, you know, as whatever, a 14-year-old, go back and discover Elvis Costello. And once I did, I just never went back. And to me, this is his best song. It's my favorite Elvis Costello song. I know everyone has opinions about it, but I love this track. I always have. I always will. I think it's such a strong song. And I'm super interested to hear what you think of it. And I noticed when I went through and I was looking at my picks, I was kind of, again, kind of doing a deep dive on you and the show and researching. It was interesting to me that you guys have done an Elvis Costello album on the show. It wasn't Punch the Clock, which is what Shipbuilding is from. I think you guys did Armed Forces.
Yeah.
But I chose one song that you guys have done a show on, and then another song from a band that you guys haven't done a show on yet. And so I was interested. You guys do so much research for each episode. You must, because it's so beyond just like what you can read in Wikipedia. You know, there's so much there. So I'm curious to hear your take on Shipbuilding and Elvis Costello in general.
Yeah, well, perfect. I love Elvis Costello. I think he's
Yay!
amazing. He's another guy that spoke to me real early and often as a young teen. And because I think a lot of my entrance to music in general was my interest in songwriting. And so I
Hmm.
discovered Bob Dylan early and Elvis Costello in a pretty similar way to what you're describing. Got a greatest hits comp. I think Shipbuilding was on there, but certainly things like Allison and Watching the Detectives, etc. So I have listened to most of Elvis's catalog through my life. I would say I'm a little more centered on the early stuff. But yeah, this is an amazing song. The chords, he is an underrated songwriter, like writer with a capital W. I think he's up there with the greats who write standards, right? He's kind of a Duke Ellington type almost for the modern era. I think a lot of his songs belong in the book of things you should reference 100 years from now, right? And I think this is a great
Totally.
example of that. The chords swoop around between keys, they're borrowing from parallel minor. It's beautiful. I totally agree. And his voice is great, of course, as well.
So good. And I think, you know, like even like literally his songwriting, the lyrics that he wrote are what made this song. You know, it started as a Robert Wyatt song, who, and no disrespect to the Robert Wyatt version, like his recording of it is also great, but I think it was intentionally for Robert Wyatt, but they didn't like the lyrics that he wrote. And
Mm,
so they went to Elvis Costello. He sort of reworked and wrote this version as we know it. And that ended up being the version of Shipbuilding that both artists recorded. But I just think that it's like people love to, you know, argue about it being a Robert Wyatt song. And it is, again, no disrespect, but for me, like Elvis Costello owns this song. I just think it's beautiful.
No,
And I
great
love
writing.
that.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
metaphor.
great writing for
And
sure.
I was thinking, I mean, speaking of the jazz connection, I was thinking when I was listening to it, I could hear Chet Baker singing this. You know, it
Mm-hmm.
has that kind of old school feel, and obviously there's a trumpet solo in it as
Yeah,
well,
the
which
horns.
reminded me of Chet a little bit. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I hadn't thought about it being like envisioning it as a Chet Baker song, but now as I like close my eyes and hear it, I'm like, oh man, that actually would have been really fantastic.
Well,
Well, oh,
can
go
I
ahead,
can I mention one other thing I discovered this week,
please.
which is random connection, but the guy who co-wrote this with Elvis, a guy called Cliff Langer, he
Hmm.
produced one of my all-time favorite indie records from the 90s, which was They Might Be Giants' Flood.
Oh, the Flood album.
Yes. And that was
I love
to a super weird kid, probably 11-year-old at that point. Man, They Might Be Giants
Birdhouse
were
in Your Soul. Oh my gosh,
that was
so good.
a life raft for me back then.
Same. Love that album. Love, love, love. Always go back to like. I think if anybody asks about They Might Be Giants, I just say just go listen to that. And the
Absolutely.
Flood is like the way to go. I'm glad that you brought that. You know what? Nobody's ever brought a They Might Be Giants song to the show. I'm gonna have to change that. I'm gonna have to add a They Might Be Giant. Maybe Birdhouse for Your Soul. That's a really good one.
You know, I'm going to admit it just didn't seem cool enough to bring to your show, but that's on me. I take it back. They Might Be Giants. You guys are cool.
Yes,
It's
I
literally my first
love.
concert ever when I was about 14. I went to, my parents dropped me off at an all ages club in Philadelphia, and I saw They Might Be Giants, and it was awesome.
So good. My friend Missy and I can remember us going out and buying that cassette and just listening over and over and dancing around her room, like the stuff that
Yeah,
you do when you're a kid.
of course.
But it's just fun. It's happy. And if you listen to it now, it still feels like such a breath of fresh air, where you're like, it's not sad. It's not mean. It's just like a fun album. And then
I
you
agree.
can get into the lyrics and gets deep. It gets weird. It gets silly. I love all of it.
Yeah, and a lot of great production touches. So props to Cliff Langer, who worked with Elvis Costello on Shipbuilding.
Yeah, very cool. I did not know that. So that was an excellent tidbit to bring to the show.
Uh,
Well, we're going to round the playlist out today with another favorite of mine, of all time, like top 10 on my bands, like, CDs that you can take on a desert island, all of the things like love, love, love the Cars. And so I chose their song, Since You're Gone, from the Shake It Up album in 1981. I mean, the Cars for me, like I'll take a like I'll go deep and then I'll take a break for a couple of years and then I'll come back and like only listen to the Cars exclusively for like a month and then
sure.
take a break, but they always like find their way back to me. I love Rick Ocasek's voice. I think that the Cars sound so different, especially for like this 80s time frame. They sound so different than the other bands that were coming out of Boston, where you think of like Aerosmith or Boston. Like the Cars were just a completely different take for me from that area. And I'd say, this band along with, I think we mentioned them earlier, this band along with like Van Halen, it just reminds me of a good time. Like the Cars are like summertime, hanging with my friends, like even a sad, so I'm air quoting, like a sad song like this one is never sad to me because I just love this band so much and they conjure nostalgia for me in a way that very few bands do. So they have a place in my heart, I think, just for like their memory making ability in my head to take me back to a very specific time and place in my life. And they're one of those bands too that I feel like I discovered and I liked. It wasn't my parents' music. It wasn't, like somebody else didn't bring them to me. Like I heard the Cars and was like, wait a minute, who is this? I love this. And there's something when like you find it yourself, at
Absolutely.
least for me, it makes it a little more special, or it holds a different place in my heart than something that is, given to me by somebody else or that, I discover in a movie soundtrack or something like that. What is your take on this song and on the Cars in general?
Yeah, I had never. I don't think I had ever heard this one, or at least
Really?
hadn't actively listened to it. So I don't know the Cars that well. Of course, I know of them, and I like them, and I've heard the greatest hits, right? And I've heard the stuff on the radio, and so yeah, I dig it. This is kind of my discovery of the day, and I would love to do a deep dive on the Cars, but I have not done that yet. So first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't call out, since I mentioned the other production connection, that Rick Ocasek, lead singer of the Cars, also produced another of my favorite 90s gems, which was the first Weezer album,
Oh, good one.
which was just issued to us as we walked into high school, I think in
Right.
1993. But and great production on that, right? But no, I've
Yes.
always respected the Cars. I can remember a time when I thought Rick Ocasek's voice sounded a lot like David Byrne's, and I almost
Mm-hmm.
would get them confused. So I do think they're really good at riding that line of that kind of pop craftsmanship line is, I think, what you're talking about, because this sounds like the decade of the 1980s without being mired in it, without being weighed down by some of the, frankly, bad production choices that have not aged that well. It feels like they tempered a lot of those instincts, and it still kind of pops to me, and it sounds like it could be an indie song from now ish, right? So that was great.
Yeah, exactly. It's a note that I wrote too, that so many 80s songs are just so rooted in the 80s that you can't ever separate the decade from the song. And this feels almost like a revival. Like I could hear this being, like The Neighborhood, or one of those
Yeah.
bands that that you can tell is like heavily influenced from that decade, or likes the throwback sound of that. You could drop it into I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I could drop this on her playlist, and she might not know that this was one of my songs, not one of her songs.
I agree. I totally agree. And I think that's the mark of really great taste. And, I'll just say it must be hard in the mix of the 1980s or any time period where there's cool new technology and cool new sounds. You're like, oh, I want to use this, lean into this, take chances. I get it. But it's also nice when something, 40 years on, still sounds pretty good and relevant. So yeah, it was a nice surprise for me. So I want to listen to more.
Yeah, good, 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 good. Well, I'll have you back on the show after you've gone through your Cars musical journey, and we'll do a deep dive episode just on the Cars. I've been wanting to do that forever, and it would be fun to do it with somebody that's sort of deep diving now, not somebody that's kind of been steeped in the nostalgia of the band, or to have both takes. I think could be really interesting. So
sounds like you'll have to come over to our show for that.
Wow. Well, I'll do that too. We'll just have we'll have a Cars fest.
Exactly.
When is Rick Ocasek's birthday, or the anniversary of his passing, or something? We'll find a way to.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
We'll find a way to celebrate the Cars. Well, Rob, thank you so much for sharing what you're listening to this week. This has been, like I said, since you and I first spoke and I first discovered the podcast, I've been so excited to have you on. And I've been telling everybody about 1001 Album Complaints, because I think it's such a good show. And I cannot wait to go through, like I said, all 145 episodes, or 46 episodes, probably by the time this airs. So you guys definitely check out the podcast to learn more about Rob. You can visit his website at Linktree. You guys know how to do Linktree, but I'll spell it anyway. linktr.ee/the Chop Unlimited. That's THECHOPUNLIMITED. And this site will point you to all projects from Rob's creative collective, which is called The Chop Unlimited, including the weekly podcast that we've been speaking about, 1001 Album Complaints, and plus every band and album they've released through their small record label. They also have some really cool merch I will shout out. I love your merch. I like your Chop logo.
Thank you.
And as always, please be sure to follow, download, and share this show. And if you love listening, drop us a review on Spotify or Apple. And last but not least, to stay informed on all things Super Awesome Mix and what are you listening to, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Super Awesome Mix. Thanks for listening, and please join me again next week to find your new favorite song.